Meeting in order. It is 12 o'clock. Let the record reflect that all members are present except Director Sullivan. Oh, and Director Scatini. Is there any members of the public who speak on any of the closed session items? Again, I'll ask, is there any member of the public like to speak on any of the closed session items? Is there anyone online?
No hands raised.
All right, given that, we will now recess into closed session. Thank you, everyone. We'll return back to open session. It is 1:13. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. At this time, was there any additions and corrections? Clerk?
Not at this time, Chair.
Thank you. We'll now go to public comment. Is there any member of the public who'd like to make a comment on any item not on the agenda?
No hands raised.
And seeing none in chambers, we'll now move on our presentation, a review of the 2023 groundwater extraction summary report presented by Amy Woodrow and Riley Clark. Amy?
And Chair, before Amy gets started, I just want to report out for closed session so I
yes.
don't forget, and there are no reportable items today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Apologize for not asking. All right, Amy.
Good afternoon, Chair LeBar and directors. Thank you for the moment there while I was shifted over into the panelist group. My name's Amy Woodrow. I'm a senior hydrologist here at the agency, and I'm happy to share a presentation with you today about the 2023 groundwater extraction summary report. I'll go ahead and pull up the slides here for you and we can get started. Just as a lead in and some background, this program is funded through Fund 116 at the agency, and the activities that we'll be discussing today are included. They were included both in last year's budget and as well as the current fiscal year budget. The groundwater extraction data we'll be looking at today informs a range of different programs and projects, both at the agency and external to the agency. It's a long data set. We've been collecting this information since 1993. And it gets used both in products that come before this board, for example, the groundwater elevation contours and seawater intrusion maps. And it's also incorporated into other tools like the modeling tools that are used both by the agency and by external agencies. And it informs other things such as the Groundwater Sustainability Agency's work as well. So it's a very useful and robust data set. Just as a quick refresher about the groundwater extraction program, this covers the agency zones 2, 2A, and 2B, which is shown on the map here. As I mentioned, this has been data that's collected by the agency since 1993, and it is driven and the terms and scope of the program are described in a number of different agency ordinances. The data we'll be discussing today are aggregated and discussed on a sub-area basis. So that's the 4 sub-areas you see on the figure before you. Just as a reminder, they are different than the sub-basins that we hear about in a SGMA context. But I just wanted to give that overview before we get into things. Just briefly to touch on the fact that this is an agency program that has some element of it happening almost all year long, from the data collection and public facing portion where we're working with well operators and owners to bring their information in, doing outreach with folks, and then a fairly extensive internal quality assurance process and data analysis that goes into producing the report that will be shared with you today. There are 3 main parts of the summary report. The largest component of it is related to the groundwater extraction data. This discusses an overview of the monthly data that's provided on a per well basis. There's also a discussion in the report about anticipated conservation practices, both agricultural and urban practices that people anticipate using in the coming year, and also a breakdown of groundwater use and how that breaks out relative to different crop types. So getting right into the information from 2023, the total annual extractions for that year were 399,183 acre feet. that's broken down. Approximately 90% of that was from agricultural pumping and the 9.3% from urban pumping. And this is based on a data set. We had 1,940 wells that were required to report to us in 2023. 96% of those did. So that is what this data represents. It's a very high compliance rate that's consistent with what we've seen for this program in the past. And overall, we saw, relative to 2022, we saw groundwater extraction decrease in 2023, as would be expected given the wet year that we had, with those largely coming in January and March with that significant rainfall. Overall, we saw a decrease of 88,000 acre feet in groundwater pumping compared to the prior year, with the largest proportion of that coming from the decrease in agricultural pumping, although there was a decrease in the urban extraction as well. And those numbers you can see here on the screen. And then when we start to break that down geographically, you can see here both the table and as a pie chart representation of where that pumping was, both agricultural and urban, across the different sub areas. You can see we show on the graph there on the right both the agricultural and urban by sub area as well. So you can see how that breaks out geographically. And I'm going to step now through the different sub basins with the groundwater extraction data. Each section will start with a map like this that shows just the sub area that we're talking about. In this case, we'll start with the pressure sub area. It shows the approximate locations of the wells that reported data to us, and the symbols for each well are graded both in size and color relative to the volume of groundwater extraction. So those smallest white dots had 0 groundwater extraction up through the large red dots, which had over 2,000 acre feet of extractions. There were 573 wells in the pressure subarea that reported data to the agency in 2023. And overall, there was 92,422 acre feet of pumping in the pressure subarea for 2023. This was a decrease from 2022, both in the urban and agricultural pumping. About 1,300 acre feet of a decrease for urban pumping, and 28,500 acre feet of a decrease for the agricultural pumping. And we have a few subsets of the pressure subarea data that get broken out just because there's some sort of additional interest, one of which is included in the report, looks at extraction within Zone 2B, which is the area that receives recycled water and water from the SRDF through CSIP. That's the purple area shown on the map there. And then the gray area is what's referred to as the area of impact. So that's the geographic space where chloride concentrations are generally 250 milligrams per liter or higher. So that indicates it's not designated as seawater intrusion yet. That's at the 500 milligram per liter threshold, but 250 is indicating elevated chloride over background, potential areas that might be at risk for seawater intrusion. So we looked at the pumping within this area. Again, there was a decrease from 2022 in the water provided by CSIP supplemental wells. And there was also a decrease in the amount of pumping from a few of the private wells that are maintained within the CSIP area. Again, as kind of would be expected with the type of water year that we had in 2023. And then one other data set that we pull out and look at separately from that pressure subarea total is related to pumping happening in the deep aquifers. And I'd like to note first here, the wells shown on this map are what the agency used to tabulate pumping in 2023 for the deep aquifers. It is a different and smaller subset of wells relative to what has been included in the deep aquifers study that was just recently completed by the Salinas Valley Basin GSA. So just wanted to draw a line there that we can't necessarily compare these numbers to the numbers in that report because they are not using the same data set. But what we did see looking at what the agency used for the deep aquifers wells was a decrease in agricultural pumping from the deep aquifers and a slight increase in urban pumping from the deep aquifers in 2023. And you can see the bar graph here. The table with all of the numbers is included in the annual summary report. It was omitted here just because it's a large table. And I'll move on now to the east side subarea. Again, this is the map showing the number of well and location of wells. We had 408 wells in the east side subarea that reported extractions in 2023, and a similar downward trend in both urban and agricultural extractions in that change from 2022. The magnitude is lower than we saw in the pressure subarea, but the trend is the same. And moving on to the forebay subarea, there were 510 wells in the forebay that reported groundwater extractions in 2023. And as in the prior two subareas, we saw decreases in both urban and agricultural pumping. The urban pumping decreased 796 acre feet. The agricultural pumping increased on the order of 24,000 acre feet. And our final sub-area, the Upper Valley, 379 wells comprise the data set for the Upper Valley, and also decreases observed here in the urban and agricultural pumping compared to 2022. A smaller change in the urban pumping, we saw a 59 acre foot decrease, and 27,000 acre feet less was pumped for agricultural purposes from the Upper Valley. And then this is one of the graphs that's included in the annual report. One of the data sets that the agency collects as part of this program is related to irrigation methods. It's captured just to demonstrate some of the changes that we've seen over time. There has been an increase in drip irrigation, a general decrease in some other types of irrigation, although largely these are remaining relatively steady over the last few years. Just an interesting trend that we see over time here. And then taking the extraction data and breaking it down by crop type and sub-area. So this graph on the top has acre feet on your Y vertical axis, and then it's got different categories for different crop types across the bottom, and shows within each sub-area the amount of acre feet per acre of water that's used for that specific type of crop. You can see that there are some crops that only appear in one or a couple of the different sub-areas. There are others like the vegetable category where we see them in all sub-areas. And then the table at the bottom has the numerical representation of the data that you see above. So you can see some of the changes in the geographic distribution of how that water acre feet per acre is applied for different crops in different parts of the county. And then moving on to urban water use, the agency collects data in two kind of categories. We have small water system data that is broken down on the water use kind of per connection, and has the connection class describes the different types. So single family residential versus multifamily versus industrial. The largest usage in this category is in that industrial category. And again, we're looking at that acre feet per connection class on the table here. So you can see they're relatively unchanged. Generally, we saw decreases across all connection classes when compared to 2022. And for large water systems, again, decreases in nearly every category, the exception being that commercial and institutional category. We did see a slight increase in that water use per connection in that category for 2023. And then finally, this is a question we sometimes get asked, how well are people complying with the requirement to report? The agency has an initial closure period of the deadline to report data that's on February 15th. And that as of February 15th this year, you can see the numbers in the sort of the middle column there for how many wells still had groundwater extraction data to report. That was 237. We spend another 30 to 45 days doing outreach to well owners and operators. Sometimes it's that somebody has started a report and they just need to finish it. Other times there might be outstanding questions. So through staff communication and outreach over that 45-day period, we were able to bring that number down to 68 wells that did not report extraction data. So we finally closed that out in April of this year. And then for the agricultural and urban water conservation plans, similarly, the outreach that we were able to conduct brought in quite a bit more data and dropped that number of delinquent wells or plans that needed to be submitted by the time we finally closed things out in April. So just to wrap things up, kind of takeaway message is that we saw annual groundwater extraction decrease for 2023 across all sub areas for both agricultural and urban uses. And then our overall compliance remains similar to what we've seen in past years. So there's no action required for this today, but I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Amy. Great report. Very much appreciate that. Let me go to the directors. Any questions or comments from any directors right now? I did have one. So we are seeing on the urban side a steady decrease in the water extractions, especially when you look from the 2019 to 2023. The ones I noticed was more on the Salinas Valley, the Forebay, and the Upper Valley, where from that time period, you're looking at a 10% decrease and a 20% decrease. Is that something you expect to be leveling off, and is it more accounted for in the conservation methods that have been in place for many years and building standards on the type of water use systems, or do you have any other explanations?
I do think you're correct on both of those points. I think the other thing to consider is, changes both on the landscape irrigation side. I know that is a significant contributor as well for some of the urban use. So as people, perhaps shift their landscaping practices, I think those are areas where we might consider or continue to see declines in that category.
Okay, and do we have any idea that maybe we'll see a leveling off? When you showed the numbers that were specific by unit, I think it was the single was down to about 0.3 per year. Do you think there's going to be a point where that's kind of going to level off?
Don't know that I have enough information to say. I don't want to speculate.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me take this to the public, then I'll come back to the board. Any member of the public to speak on this item?
Christopher Bunn.
Yes, Christopher.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Chris Bunn with the Salinas Basin Water Alliance. Just curious, as part of this program of monitoring and then analyzing data, does the agency keep an eye on groundwater that's extracted from the basin and transported outside of the basin boundaries? Is that part of the analysis?
Chair, would you like me to respond?
Yes, please.
Yes, so we do have some information about where water use occurs, and there is in a process that we do look at that location and those relative to the boundaries.
Did you have any other questions, Chris?
No, that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any other members of the public? And I see
No hands raised.
Thank you. And there is none in the chambers, so I'll bring this back to the board for other questions or comments. Mike?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Amy, for the presentation. And just a quick reminder that the deep aquifer we did not have the policy that you had to destroy a well if you're going to drill a well into the deep aquifer. I think the levels and the amounts of water being pulled from the deep aquifer would have been substantially less. It is very expensive to pump from the deep aquifer, and given a choice, we would, farmers would only choose to pump from a shallow or aquifer. But because of our policies, many landowners were forced into this position to have to choose one or the other.
Thank you. Any other board directors? One is, and then I got to say is, it is quite amazing. I know we had a wet year. There was a lot of rain. There was a lot of water running down the river, so that would have decreased some of the pumping on the agricultural side. But year after year, the agricultural community continues to produce more product on less water. When I first started on this, I could have swore that they were averaging about over 400,000 acre feet per year. And now it looks like they're down to about 360. So just really great job to them. All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. Is there any member of the board who'd like to pull any item of the consent agenda? Is there any member of the public who'd like to speak on any of the consent agenda items?
No hands raised.
And none in chambers. I'll bring this back to the board for action.
Move to approve the consent.
I'll second.
All right, we have a first and a second. All in favor? Aye. Against? Abstain. Passes unanimously. We'll now move on to item number 7, consider approving a service contract with Baker Tilly US for strategic planning services. Shauna?
Yes, good afternoon, Chair LaBarre and members of the board. Shauna Murray, Deputy General Manager for this item. And the financial impact is over a 3-year period, and so it will be divvied up over 3 different fiscal years. This was heard at the Planning Committee this same month and was recommended to bring forward to the board. So the agency currently has a 5-year strategic plan that was adopted in December of 2020, and we have completed 3 years of implementation. We moved over to Baker Tilly in last year's implementation workshop that was held in January due to management partners who developed the plan kind of being absorbed by Baker Tilly. So we did a 1-year contract, but the goal is to have a multi-year contract so that we really can have continuity as far as finishing up and kind of, updating our current plan and using that as a moving on point to developing a new plan that we would anticipate having in 2026 and also be on a 5-year horizon. So the scope of work that you have before you is to create that final update for our existing plan and then pivoting over to developing a new strategic plan. And we will have this kind of longer transition period to do that so that we can really learn from our current plan and build on that so that we can get a new plan in place for 2026. There are 8 different activities in the scope of work, and they will be worked on at different times. And so they're not, you don't just go through 1 through 8. They kind of have some overlap, and that's shown in the schedule. So this is kind of a rough schedule as far as how we look at the full scope of work, but one of the first activities, activity 1, will be to develop a much more refined schedule. So you can see that there's a lot of data gathering and analysis that happens in that first year and a half, while we also are doing like activity 4, finishing up our current plan, and then moving into workshops, activity 5, that will also, have stakeholder outreach for developing that new plan, and then doing a final update once that plan's adopted, is out there in February 2027. And there's also some new activities that we have determined would be helpful as far as having management team workshops so that we really get that full engagement at the agency and really understanding of how we're implementing the plan and how we move forward with that. So the services, this is kind of not a time and materials contract. So these are by activities. And if we complete an activity, this would be the fee. If we do partial activity, this kind of came up in planning committee, we would be charged part of the fee because it is broken down like per workshop So this will be the total cost, the $212,300 that's part of the request today. And, we'd like to get this contract kicked off soon so that we can get that detailed work plan and stay on schedule to wrap up our existing strategic plan, aiming for late fall, early winter of this year, and then begin developing a new strategic plan next spring. So that completes my presentation. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Shauna. Board members, any questions, comments? Is there any member of the public like to speak on this item?
No hands raised. Excuse me, Chair. I have Norm Groot.
Norm, go ahead, please.
Sure. Thank you, Norm Groot for Farm Bureau Monterey. I thought I saw on the slide there that part of this was to conduct some focus groups and strategic partner meetings. Is that to gather information or to actually look at what needs to be included in the strategic plan?
You'd like to me answer that?
Yeah.
I guess a clarification on the difference between gathering information and feeding into the strategic plan would be helpful. Reframing the question, please.
So the slide went by very quick, so I'm not sure I even caught it correctly, but it appeared to me that there was going to be information gathering that included focus groups, and I'm not sure what a focus group can do to gather information unless it is input into the strategic plan itself.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. So gathering information is for the consultant to gather a wide range of information. And so part of that is working with stakeholders, working with staff, working with the board, and just making sure touching base with a large variety of groups to gather information to inform priorities for the agency, what's working well, what could be improved. So that's where the focus groups would be geared towards the stakeholders. And so this is a large event of gathering information. It spans about 1.5 years, at least a year, as far as collecting information. So the gathering is from the consultant's perspective.
All right, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Norm. Is there anyone else online?
No hands raised.
And there is no one in chambers, so I'll bring this back. Absolutely.
Follow on, I think, a little bit with Norm Groot's comment, is that there is many workshops at all phases of the development of the plan. So gathering information, the reviewing and input into the plan, and the finalizing of the plan. So I think there is many points for the public to participate and give input. Probably far more than we need, and that's why the contract is modified as such with, I think we have really about 16 workshops when you look at all the different types of workshops between staff, board, public, that once we find that there's been sufficient input that we can pull back on a number of workshops if we feel, but we wanted to build it in and not be caught short if we felt we needed more time. But I think there is a definite possibility the contract, could come in less than planned, too.
Thank you, Deidre. I greatly appreciate the work the Planning Committee has done to continue this process. Bring this back to the board for action.
Mr. Chair, I'll move staff's recommendation.
I'll second.
All right, we got a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Abstain. Passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to item 8. Consider recommending that the Monterey County Water Resource Agency Board of Supervisors adopt a resolution authorizing the Monterey County Water Resource Agency to enter in an agreement with the state of California. And this will be Amy.
Good afternoon again, Chair LaBarre and directors. Thank you for that introduction, Chair LaBarre. I won't read through the full action again today. There are a couple of components. Essentially, we're looking for a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to enter into this resolution with the Department of Water Resources and authorization for the general manager to execute the agreement. There has been no prior committee, board of directors, or board of supervisors action related to this. And the agency staff time that's related to this effort will be part of the grant funding. And this grant has been included in the current fiscal year budget. So, as some background, this began in March 2023 after the storm events of that year. Agency staff coordinated with Senator Laird's office to develop a proposal that would allow for a study of flooding impacts and potential projects or actions that could mitigate flood issues along the Carmel River. So the agency staff prepared a proposal. Senator Laird submitted that, and in July of 2023, $230,000 in funding was allocated for the project through Assembly Bill 102, which is where the funding came from for this, and it was kind of a very short timeline on developing the proposal. But the plan with this proposal would be that the agency would provide oversight and some grant management, and that a consultant would be retained to complete an update to an existing hydrologic model of the Carmel River and to develop a small range of potential flood control elements, be those projects or management actions that could be modeled and simulated to evaluate changes to a baseline current condition. The idea is that these options would be discussed at kind of multiple phases through a stakeholder outreach process where the results of the modeling could be shared, ideas could be suggested through that stakeholder outreach, and that would be coordinated with other county departments, for example, Housing and Community Development or Public Works and Parks, and also external agencies like the Peninsula Water Management District or the Regional Parks District, who have been involved with actions along the Carmel River historically. And the goal of the project would be to develop some options for projects or actions that could be considered and then submitted for a funding opportunity like a grant or funded through some other source. The agency is not looking to do a construction project or anything as part of this. This is really an opportunity for study and public input and consideration of options. The stage we're at right now is working on a funding agreement for this with the California Department of Water Resources so that that money can be accessed. The timeline for the overall project is still being finalized. It's likely to be on the order of 18 months. And the funding agreement will include details such as the project scope, budget, and a schedule for that. So what we're looking for today is for the board to authorize and or recommend that this go to the Board of Supervisors, who then could authorize a resolution to enter into the agreement. The agency would then be able to finalize a funding agreement with the Department of Water Resources, retain a consultant to do that work, and then begin that stakeholder outreach process that, as I mentioned, would be ongoing and iterative throughout the project. That is the update and kind of background I have for you on this. So again, we're looking for that two-part action today from your board, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Amy. Board members, Ken?
Yeah, thank you, Amy, for the report. Now, just to clarify, this is going to be the entire Carmel River watershed, right? I'm
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, not just, in other words, not just the CSAs that are there. This is, let me see, what's the extent? And I think it's not the uplands, I'm assuming, but it's just, how much of the valley does this incorporate?
Yeah, the focus of the study area is relatively small. The modeling would take in data from the entire watershed, but the study area is focused kind of around the Paso Hondo neighborhood, the Dampier Park, the baseball field there, that region. There will be, some consideration of both upstream and downstream conditions, though, to make sure that any, project that's being modeled wouldn't then be causing adverse impacts either upstream or downstream of the study area. But it is a relatively limited geographic scope.
Great, and it will obviously incorporate, well, the features that I'm thinking about that are already planned are I think, downstream of this, right? So in other words, I'm thinking about the Rancho Cañada area and the Crossroads area. So this would be upstream of that, but obviously those areas would be impacted by anything here, right? Is that correct?
That is correct. So the study area is upstream of that, and that's why we're looking to work with, make this a collaborative effort with other entities so that any planned projects or things that would happen in the foreseeable future are evaluated as part of this effort.
Thank you.
Any other board members, any questions or comments? Is there any member of the public who would like to speak on this item?
No hands raised.
And none in the chambers. I'll bring this back to the board for action.
Mr. Chair, I'll move staff's recommendation, and it's a two-parter. I'll move the staff's wording of the item.
Second.
All right, we have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Abstain? Passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to item number 9. Consider receiving an update on the development of the groundwater monitoring regulatory program and fee. Ara, you going to lead this off?
Yeah, probably easier if I do it from here. Give me a second to find a presentation. Oh, it's in a PDF? Okay. Broadcast. How do I get it up on the screen here? There we go. All right. So today we have an update for you on the development of the Salinas Basin Groundwater Monitoring Regulatory Program that we've been talking about for some months, and then of the GEMS expansion that we've been talking about well over a year at this point, and kind of the evolution of both as we've been going forward through time here. Okay. Probably is. So how do I advance it? Okay, thank you. So today's presentation at a glance, we'll talk a little bit about the Salinas Valley Groundwater Basin, the agency's monitoring history, SGMA and the new regulatory paradigm, which, changes everything going forward. What do we mean when we're talking about the WRA Groundwater Monitoring Regulatory Program? Is there something new in that? An update on the expansion of the GEMS discussion, and this idea of bringing it all together, because all of this has evolved as this conversation has moved forward. One of the things that I'd like to say about this presentation, just how excited I am about where we are in this work effort, what great progress it's made over the past several months, what a great collaboration it's been, and what a very good opportunity we have before us, not only in terms of more clearly defining roles and responsibilities for various agencies going forward, but also in terms of meeting some of the objectives that we've had for the agency. As an example, beginning to expand our ability to budget, right, and account for work on a project and programs basis. And so this also represents significant progress in that arena as well. So it's on a lot of areas. For those who haven't been tracking closely, the Salinas Valley Groundwater Basin is significant. It's huge. It runs from the county line in the south of the county, the border with San Luis Obispo, all the way to the Pacific Ocean in the northwest. The agency's history monitoring groundwater here goes back to the late 1940s. And so groundwater level monitoring has been a part of what we do from the beginning. Water quality and the seawater intrusion mapping came along in the 1960s. The groundwater extraction monitoring system, which has been the focus of a lot of discussion here lately, of course, was created in the 1990s, and thank goodness it was. Ag and urban water conservation reporting also came along in the 90s, and of course, by the mid-2010s, all of this information was a strong basis for the Salinas Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency to begin to develop their groundwater sustainability plans and the beginning of our collaboration with that organization. So the SGMA, right, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, it's actually 3 state acts. They were all signed into law in 2014, and it mandates a number of things. But to summarize, depending on the status of the basin, groundwater sustainability is to be achieved by 2040 or 2042. It assigns to DWR, or the California Department of Water Resources, a responsibility to establish and prioritize groundwater basins. There are 5 of them in the county. DWR approves plans, monitors progress, so they are our judge and jury, and ultimately they determine sustainability. SGMA also provided for the formation of groundwater sustainability agencies in lieu of county or state control. So this was an opportunity for locals to organize themselves to address their own groundwater management perspectives. There are 6 in the county. And then the development of groundwater sustainability plans, and the county's been very successful in that. And of course, in order to inform all of this and ultimately to determine sustainability, monitoring of groundwater levels, quality, and usage, among other characteristics, are required. So the groundwater monitoring regulatory program, what we're really talking about here is, for the first time, essentially developing what we'll refer to as a manual that articulates in one single place all of the things that we've been doing anyway. So making it, one cohesive monitoring program and really focusing on the modernization of our work to support today's regulatory-driven requirements. So the GEMS program is a great example where 30 years ago we chose to establish that program for reasons that existed in the time. And again, thank goodness we did. But today in a post-SGMA world, it has changed from something that was a discretionary action then to a mandate now. And so a lot of the work that we have done because we thought it was wise to do has now become a mandate. In moving forward in terms of developing the regulatory program, of course, we're aiming to leverage the agency's 75 years of expertise. The direction that we're working in here aligns with a number of the agency's strategic planning goals. I won't go through them all, but goals B for planning and new project strategies, C for financial sustainability, D for core services. So there's a number of places here that align well with the strategic plan. It, of course, supports the Salinas Valley Basin's efforts and their responsibility for governance and planning purposes. And it creates an opportunity to consolidate other monitoring efforts. And so as we were having a conversation about GEMS expansion, it became clear that there are a number of agencies that are doing groundwater management. And there are times where all of us are touching the same well numerous times. And so we're looking to try and streamline, to the extent folks are willing or it's possible, the amount of effort that goes into these monitoring programs to try to create better efficiencies for the stakeholders overall. So currently focused, of course, on consolidating, expanding the current monitoring efforts within the Salinas Valley Basin, right? And so I don't want folks to get confused that suddenly we're going to start working outside of the space that we've been working in. All we're trying to create here is the opportunity to do so if another entity would like us to do that. And so if the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District, who's responsible for Carmel River, wanted to come in and say, hey, could you all do some monitoring and data processing for us, we could consider that. So it's really meant to just create opportunities, but we don't want folks left with the impression that all of a sudden the agency's work's going to just automatically expand to be countywide. We will remain focused initially on the Salinas Valley Basin. But again, it's about creating those opportunities, whether it's for environmental health, whether it's for the Regional Water Quality Control Board and the ag waivers, or other GSAs. The existing GEMS program exists under 3 ordinances, so it is a bit convoluted when we're trying to figure out what applies to what. And so the proposal here is to repeal those ordinances and adopt one new ordinance. I think a most significant change going forward is the proposal to establish a Prop 26 regulatory fee. And so that will be something different if this in fact moves forward as proposed for everyone who's affected. And then ultimately, with respect to the GEMS expansion, seeking to support the Salinas Valley Basin GSA's requests for more information. I'll remind folks about that in a bit. So we continue to work with the SVB GSA. We are collaborating regularly on monitoring requirements. We have spent many meetings over the past few months meeting with stakeholders, building on the outreach that began in the fall of 2023. We've reported on the GEMS expansion to a number of the agency's committees and governing bodies, as well as the SVB Board of Directors and various stakeholders. And so it's very much been a, we'll talk about this wherever we can kind of program. So just as a reminder, why GEMS expansion? Again, this is about meeting the regulatory needs of the SVB. They have requirements that have been put upon them by DWR and SGMA. It helps address the recommended corrective actions that DWR identified in a number of the GSPs that the SVB put forward, and then ultimately aligns the GEMS boundaries, which we created 30 years ago, with the ones that were created by DWR about 10 years ago. DWR didn't consult with us. They drew their own lines. And so as a reminder, the red circles indicate the geographic areas where GEMS expansion would occur. And this isn't something that's going to occur overnight, right? This is something that's going to be implemented over the course of years. And when we think about how we eat this elephant, prioritization includes focusing on the 18400 first because it is in that quicker time frame in terms of meeting sustainability. It's the registration of unregistered wells, ensuring that extraction reporting in the data gaps is beginning, and then looking for those opportunities to create other cooperative enhancements. So some of the things that will be changing, if you're in the current GEMS program and you have a well smaller than 3 inches in diameter, currently you don't need to register. Under the SVB's request, all wells would be required to register. Sorry. Drop my hand here. Our intent here is for known wells not to re-register. We don't want to go and pester people unnecessarily. If we know a well's there and we understand its characteristics, they will be registered. But going forward, we will need better communication about changes to wells, ownership, repair modifications, destruction, and so forth. On the reporting side, that 3-inch threshold comes into play again. If you were smaller than that 3 inches diameter, you didn't report in the past. Under SGMA defined sort of the minimum at 2 acre-feet per year. This is one of those areas that will take some time to evolve into because clearly not everyone who's on the cusp is going to understand, am I pumping 2, 2.2, 1.8? So this is one of those areas that's going to have to evolve. And then, other potentials going down the road in terms of reporting time frame. Amy was just talking about that here a bit ago in her report and trying to accelerate the time frame to better meet DWR's needs. So just to summarize, right, so the expansion is about meeting the regulatory needs of the SVB for their jurisdiction. It will include registration of wells not previously registered. It will include new reporting requirements. It aims to improve processes and improve efficiencies and create that opportunity to meet the future needs of others. So how do we begin to bring this all together? And it sort of starts with this idea of the ordinance, and the draft ordinance is included in the board packet today. The new ordinance really aims to do three things, right? It aims to affirm the agency's authority to perform groundwater monitoring. That's pretty clear in the Agency Act, but we want to affirm that here. We're establishing the opportunity for others to work with the agency in terms of helping support their groundwater management needs, and it establishes the new regulatory fee to cover the costs of the program. As I had mentioned earlier, a significant change is from the way the agency has historically allocated costs, which has been by acre. What we're proposing to do going forward is to allocate costs on a per well basis. And really, this is just in recognition of the reality that, you know, if I have 100 acres with one well on it, my neighbor has 100 acres with 10 wells on it, the per acre cost allocation, we'd be paying the same. But when we're doing things like reporting or checking groundwater level and so forth, it really isn't the number of acres that is affecting the cost, it's the number of wells. And so that's the logic behind that approach. The ordinance is aimed at providing the agency broad authority. We want it to be flexible enough whereas other entities, when and if they approach us with requests for services, the ability to provide those services somehow hasn't been precluded by language in the ordinance. So we've aimed to keep the ordinance broad in its authority. We intend to look at service agreements with other entities. In this case, let's talk about the Salinas Valley Basin. Service agreements to define the terms and conditions, and then attached to that, and call it an exhibit, call it a task order, whatever you want, it would be, that's where the specific work that the requesting entity would be asking us to do. And the proposed costs. And so stakeholders, as work is being requested, they can see quite clearly, you know, what is it that's being proposed to be done here. And then ultimately, we would expect these to be adopted by resolution by the Board of Supervisors on at least an annual basis as part of our budgeting cycle. Think of it something like when we're adopting resolutions for the various zone assessments and the changes that happen there. It would be very, very similar to that. And so again, this idea that stakeholders will see what's being proposed, they have multiple opportunities to weigh in. So next steps, we'll continue to work with County Council and the SVB in introducing the ordinance to you all today. We're not asking for any direction on it, but what we are wanting is to create an opportunity, another month-long opportunity for folks to review it, offer comments with the aim that we'll be bringing, you know, we'll be seeking a request for recommendation in the August time frame. And I think the other piece of it that's important when we're talking about the regulatory groundwater monitoring program as a whole is the work that the agency has begun to develop our own manual that describes not only what the SVB is requesting of us, but everything else we continue to do. Things like water quality in the 18400, groundwater levels throughout the basin, and so forth. This is all work that hasn't historically been well described, well captured. Obviously, staff understands what the work is and does it well, but this is an opportunity for us to kind of capture the narrative around all of this in one place. You can see the narrative about the activities with the associated budget, and begin to understand how it all fits together. It better helps us understand priorities and inform the public. And then the last point being that with respect to this regulatory fee, we have selected a consultant, and that Nexus study has begun, so we're underway there. So just sort of updating a bit on proposed timelines. Again, we would aim to bring this version, and it will be informed by others. So the version you're seeing today, I assume, is going to have some changes to it when we bring it back on August 19th. But I'm hoping it's the 80% solution, not the 20% solution. We would be seeking a recommendation at the 19th to advance to the Board of Supervisors, and then we would aim to have the two readings in front of the supervisors on September 10th and 24th. All of this in support of the goal to begin the new registration and reporting requirements on November 1st. And so that concludes my update of where we are. Again, I invite you all to read the draft ordinance, read the draft manual. Feel free to offer any comments. We will continue to bring in comments from, all sectors and consider those as we work towards, what will essentially be version 3.0 at the August presentation.
All right, thank you, Ara. We appreciate all the work that's been done. Board members, any questions, comments? Yes, Matt.
Or would you refresh my memory on what the Prop 26 process is?
Yeah, so the Prop 26 process, if I'm understanding the question correctly, Prop 26 allows for the establishment of fees for services that are rendered, regulatory fees, and the entire notion there is that the cost of implementing the regulatory program is recovered essentially equally, from the fee. And so that's the basic architecture of it. This work has evolved into being entirely regulatory in nature post-Sigma. And so there would be the preparation of what's commonly referred to as a nexus study. You could call it a rate study if you like. And that looks at what are the tasks being performed, and this is where the manual piece of it comes from. So if you go to the manual, the draft manual that was in the board packet, you'll kind of see that list of tasks, and then taking that list of tasks and parsing out how many staff hours is involved, what sort of equipment do we need, how much vehicle time, and things like that, and then assigning costs into that. And so now we've got the effort, the resources, the costs, and ultimately that translating into the proposed fee. The proposed fee under the current schedule, we are aiming to have this study done by the November timeframe, and so that ultimately would have to be adopted by resolution. It would come through recommendation through the directors and adopted by the supervisors. That's our aim. I certainly want to make sure that the study is good rather than quick, and so if that slides a little bit, it would be in the interest of quality.
So this avoids a public vote, essentially.
It does not require a public vote, no.
Thank you.
Any other board members?
I'll just continue to say thank you for the collaborative work and the thought process of helping us use our money wisely as we work through this. Appreciate it.
Mark?
And Perrette may be on too if she wants to say something.
We got Mark first.
Okay.
And if Perrette is, we'll go to her next.
Okay, great.
I know we've had this at the committee meeting level, but under the Section 7 groundwater extraction reporting, we talked about this a little bit because we may have some communities that are low income that if we can maybe get the county to look for some grant funding that would be available to cover the extraction measuring equipment, something to that effect. And then I know we also talked about this because this Section 7 is pretty important out of this thing. It's kind of the meat of it, if I look at it that way, that everybody should understand that at a certain point they're all going to have to do this. It's something that we could put out there in various meetings to let them know that this is something that's going to happen, and they need to get themselves in position to follow, because there is good language here for both sides of this. But yeah, this is a good work in progress.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Thank you, Director.
Is Perrette on? Did she want to make any comments or?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair. Perrette Harman, SABGSA. I wanted to echo, this has been a very, very successful and productive collaboration between the two agencies and our staffs. So we are really looking at a process that we both need and the results that both agencies need for meeting our objectives. How can two governmental agencies do it in a more effective and efficient way, and more transparent, but also causing less work for the groundwater users. So I know there's a lot of details that we might not get right at the first step. So that was the reason why pulling the details out of the ordinance and having them in a document, regulatory document, that is easier to revise on annual basis. We came up with that manual and service agreement. And so we're gonna try to get it right, but I'm sure there's details that we need to tweak. So be patient with us, please. And another piece of that is the funding of it. There's some upfront costs that we fortunately are able to fund from a grant that we received from DWR. That applies to just all of the efforts that we're doing now, and also outreach. That's a huge component of that, is to make sure that we reach as many groundwater users as we possibly can. And they are all very different. What applies to one or matters to one might not be the same as for somebody else in the basin, because we're looking at big ag users who've been reporting the extractions. And then we have those small systems that have never asked or had to do that, and they don't even have meters. So how do we help them? How do we reach them? How do we explain to them what is the role of the Water Resource Agency and what is the role of the GSA? So it's not an easy task, but we're definitely, we know how important it is. So any ideas, any input that you have, because you have all your networks, what might be more helpful, what should we do more of, what should we do less of, when getting the word out there is very appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you, Perrette, and we're very appreciative of the collaboration on your agency as well. And we're very fortunate. We're so far ahead of the game when it comes to this monitoring that our agency had in place, and to be able to expand it like this, it's just going to definitely make a difference for all of our residents and stakeholders. Any other board members, any comments or questions before I go to the public? Is there any member of the public who could speak on this item?
Marjorie Kay.
Yes, Marjorie.
Thank you. I have a few questions. Acronyms always get me a little confused. So you had SVB on the PowerPoint slides, and I just want to make sure that is the GSA.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. And also the discharge pipes that comes out of the well, I guess that's the water, like I have an independent well, and I have 1.5 inch pipes coming out. So I guess, and I'm de minimis, so I guess I will not be part of this. I'm not sure. I am in what looks like the expansion area up at the very top of the agency, and it was very unclear on the PowerPoint slides on Zoom. A lot of the writing and on the PowerPoint slides via Zoom was on, I could not understand it. So that's just, is it in the packet? I apologize, I've been multitasking, listening and doing something else. So I can look, I'm not, is the PowerPoint slides that you just used on the in the packet, or is it something that's going to get added later?
No, Marjorie, they are available in the packet.
And
thank you.
And then one last. Ara can answer a couple of those questions. Go ahead and pause it for a second. Then if you had one more, we'll go back to it.
Yeah, and so Margie, this is Ara. I can't speak to your specific well. You know, if it's in the expansion area, the two things that would change in your circumstance or anyone else in your situation would be, we will be looking for all wells to register. And so the way you described your well, I am presuming it hasn't registered before. So we would be looking for all wells to register, but you may not have a reporting requirement given the size. And that's just something we'll work through as we go forward.
Okay.
Thank you. And I have one last question on, and thank you. And you know me. I mean, I've been very supportive of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. I was on the committee to make the recommendation on what the agency was. I've been following all of the water monitoring for years. So I was so glad when the act got signed. And the last question is, do you have any idea of what the cost may be for that, well, how much money is going to be taken out of people's wallets type thing?
Yeah, no, not yet. And that's exactly why we've initiated the Nexus study, to be able to answer that question. And so as that study matures, we will be reporting out along the way, you so people can understand what the order of magnitude, if you will, might be.
All right, thank you, Marjorie. And we'll now move on to Christopher Bunn.
Thank you, Chris Bunn with the Water Alliance. This is a great idea. I think in general, anything that reduces the silo effect in government is a good thing. But I do have one critique, and that is the fact that the wells that are using 2 acre-feet and less are not going to be part of the reporting requirement. I think that's a pretty big mistake. And I understand that decision really lies more within the GSA rather than Water Resource Agency. But if that data is not going to be reported, that's going to have pretty serious ramifications, specifically for the Monterey Subbasin and the Langley Subbasins, where you have so many people and so much of the water use there is de minimis. So if that data is not being reported, it means that will ripple out into how benefit assessments are carried out in those areas, and also how the models are constructed and the water budgets are seen in the advancing years. So if that oversight is not corrected now, it's going to have to be corrected in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We'll now go on to Norm.
Thank you, Norm Groot for Farm Bureau Monterey. And first, I want to thank Perrette for mentioning that there will be significant outreach needed. There are a lot of small de minimis users who need to register their wells in those areas identified, and kind of echo what Mr. Bunn just stated related to the usage there and where we may end up actually needing to do this on a basis of how many of those wells are actually registered. So I think that is an important point that Chris was making there. I had a question as to whether or not the agency here has actually looked at what is needed for resources to carry this out, since we are now matching earlier dates for reporting because of DWR's requirements of the GSA, and whether or not that's going to need additional resources within this agency to make that happen and becoming compliant with those dates.
Yeah, so Norm, Zara, we're assessing that now as we're going through the Nexus study and the development of the manual. The timing piece of it may not be so much the need for additional resources as changing the frequency of reporting by well owners or users, and over time, potentially the implementation of technology that could really automate a lot of this reporting. And so we are considering a number of ways to, ease the ability to report more wells quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. We'll move to Nancy.
Thank you. Nancy Isaacson, Salinas Valley Water Coalition. I would really like to thank your staff and Perrette as well, General Manager for the GSA, that it has been a collaborative effort. And I think not only with the 2 agencies, GMs and staff, but with the stakeholders. And we really have appreciated being part of that process. So I think what's been put together, we believe is a really good start, and done some great things and putting it all together in an understandable fashion that hopefully we can all move forward with. We will be further reviewing and making comments, and so appreciated Aris sharing the time frame. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. And now I'll move to Thomas.
Thank you, Chair Labar. Tom Versick speaking. With respect to what Ms. Isaacson said, ditto. I have one question which possibly can't be answered yet, but given that there'll be a Prop 26 source of revenue, it would be good to also identify, if not this moment, but in the study, what revenue will be not collected to offset the amount that covers what the agency is doing now, if that makes any sense. I certainly understand there could be, likely will be, additional efforts, and the Prop 26 fee will certainly address all that. But it occurs to me that if there is a new fee, one would look for the offset to some degree somewhere. That's all.
Thank you, Tom. All right, I'll bring this back to the board for any additional comments or questions.
Chair, I'd like to, never mind.
Okay. Mark?
You know, from the public comment, there was a good point made in regards to the category of de minimis wells. And I think we maybe keep in mind that if we end up with a larger amount of de minimis well category, we might have to look at considering them reporting as well, because either do it now or do it later. So that's just, it was something that caught my ear, and it kind of makes sense, you know, that we got to be open to that fact. That's all the comments I got.
Yeah, that is a good point. And if we don't, we'll just have to calculate it at the max times the number of those wells. Yes.
Yeah, and I want to just elaborate on it. I think it makes sense to include the de minimis wells reporting, and you can phase in when you choose to start collecting it, but I would be proactive in not pushing that down and saying that they will report, but you may decide you have other priorities when that reporting takes place, can be determined at a later time potentially.
All right. No more comments? Thank you, everyone. Good discussion. No. Oh.
The only other.
Consideration.
As much as I would normally agree with that statement, but my only concern is that it's good to have historical data, historical, you know, amounts of water, and show that over a period of time with, you know, with droughts and without droughts, and look at, see what those numbers are. So, you know, if we go that route, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're going to lose that historical data and creating some form of trend.
Thank you. All right, can I get a motion to receive the update?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a first and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Abstain. Thank you, everyone. It passes unanimously. Item 10 has our July, August, September calendars. Any questions or comments from any board members on that?
Chair, I just want to rectify the calendar for July 25th for the Reservoir Operations Advisory Committee. That has been canceled.
Okay, thank you. Any member of the public want to speak on that update? Hearing and seeing none. General Manager's report. Ara?
Thank you, Chair. The personnel update, we continue to make progress on the development of an agency-specific compensation philosophy. On June 27th, agency staff met with staff from the county HR department to discuss the draft philosophy and to discuss the draft scope of work for its associated study. We're in the stages now of working to finalize those two documents, and so that we can initiate the effort. With respect to moving forward with developing a unique compensation philosophy for the agency, there is a requirement that the county's HR meet with the appropriate agency-related unions, meet and confer, and so the county's HR will take the lead on that effort. In terms of staffing, we did have a new hire, a water resources technician, Amanda Cuswenza. She was an intern for us last year, and we're very happy to have her back on a full-time basis this year. In recruitments, we're continuing to look for water resources technicians, wrapping up interviews. We had also conducted interviews on a management analyst position, and that was largely aimed at helping us administer the various grants that we have in place and that we continue to receive. But we're holding up on a final decision there as we assess how we want to manage our dam safety programs going forward. We have a significant amount of money to work with over the next 3 years or so, and making sure that we're managing those projects and hitting our time marks is going to be very, very important. So we're assessing how we might do that better. Upcoming recruitments include the maintenance superintendent at dams, and then replacing Tam Voss, who is our associate hydrologist, as well as establishing the maintenance manager position. So that's the up and coming. I'll pause there unless there are any questions on personnel.
Please continue.
Very good. On dam safety funding, on July 3rd, the legislature passed and Acting Governor Mike McGuire signed SB 867, the Safe Drinking Water, Wildfire Prevention, Drought Preparedness, and Clean Air Bond Act of 2024. So we will have a water bond on the November ballot. It, at the end of the day, ended up being substantially smaller than we had hoped, and certainly substantially smaller than was discussed last year. A strong reflection of the state's current fiscal situation. But all in all, a success nonetheless, and a shout out to the county's advocacy team, Annette Diadamo and Ashley Walker, who did a great job for us and for the county in that effort. The county and the Resources Agency continue to support the bond initiative. We are part of a dam safety funding coalition, and so sent a letter to that effect. Aqua, their state ledge, has decided to take a neutral position on the bond. All in all, reflective of their disappointment in its ultimate size. I like pie. If the slice of pie is small or big, I'm still getting some pie. But anyways, I'm glad we're part of yet another coalition, and that we continue to support the bond initiative. And then lastly, just sort of reiterating, we are, sort of examining internally with the existing funding we have in place and all of the projects that are lined up to be performed with that funding. Do we have the management structure in place to make sure that all those trains are hitting their stations on time? And so we'll report more on that later. I'll pause there unless there are other questions.
Yeah, I've got one.
Sure.
So we passed a water bond damn near 10 years ago to build a reservoir, to do water projects in the state. That money hasn't even been spent. We've got a new one coming on the ballot in November. A lot of people have taken a neutral stance because the bond's $10 billion, but over a period of 30 years, it'll end up costing us just over $20 billion, the taxpayers, that is. $20 billion over a period of 30 years. It's a question of we pass all these bonds and the money sits, we don't do anything, we pass more bonds to add to them. I know we're short of money, but I guess I'm looking out for the taxpayer that's got to pay all this stuff, and all you're doing is burdening the next generation and the generation after that to pay all these bonds off. We can't continually add bonds. We're going to have to figure out how to do more with less and spend the money that we've already approved first. So that's my comment. Like I said, there's a lot of people out there who took a neutral stance that are part of ag that we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and it's a fair observation.
Matt?
All right, what amount ended up being for dam safety?
Oh, good question. I want to say 468 million. But
Fighting over.
yeah, I'll send around that breakdown.
Any other directors? All right. That was it, right, Ara?
No, a couple other issues. Okay. Just a quick update on the Monterey 1 reconciliation process. On the hydrodynamic modeling, we are continuing to receive data from the remote monitoring units. These were the electronic devices that we were struggling with. Overall, the performance has been much better and is giving us the ability to run the model as we go along, QA/QC in real time, so we don't find ourselves in that same spot we were in last year in terms of getting to the end of the season and finding out, oh, wow, we've got a lot of discrepancies here. So that's working well. And then a quick update on the financial audit. That work is essentially complete and is moving for distribution to the supervisors. There will be a presentation at the supervisors meeting on August 13th and before this body on August 19th. And so we're nearing the end of that process. On the aqua front, quickly, there is the conference that will be held in December 3rd through 5th in Palm Desert. And so I'll have Eva reach out to folks and see if anyone's interested in that, but it's a good time. And in addition to the water bond work, they're very much now focused on advocating for amendments to a bill that was signed last year, AB 1594, which requires public agencies to upgrade to zero-emission vehicles. A lot of public agencies are struggling with that because of the nature of the equipment that we use, especially the big trucks. And so there continues to be effort there. And then on the regulatory and legislative activities, a few highlights there. Good news, there was a California Supreme Court ruling that eliminated from the November ballot a proposition that was referred to as the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act. In essence, that was going to make it even more difficult for public agencies like ours to be able to raise future revenues. It was also going to jeopardize decisions that public agencies had made over the past several years in terms of establishing existing rates. And so the Supreme Court found that that was not worthy to go on the November ballot, and so that was a bit of good news. Also, at the state level, July 3rd, the State Water Resources Control Board adopted Making Conservation a California Way of Life. One of the improvements that occurred in the development of that legislation was much more local control than had been originally contemplated. I was thinking it would be interesting perhaps to ask M1W to come before this board and do a presentation about the potential effects of that legislation on the recycled water availability and how it translates to supply for CSIP. I don't have all the ins and outs of the local effect, and they certainly would be tracking this closely. So I thought that might be something of interest for folks.
Any opposition from any directors? Sounds good.
Okay. On the PL 566 front, this is a funding source to the Natural Resources Conservation Service that we've been communicating with them about as a potential for NRCS. Recently, the Biden administration revised their manual to reduce the total project funding eligibility from 75%, which was what we were looking at under the Ag Water Management subprogram, to language that says similar rate to other cost share program, which in the federal realm would essentially be 50%. So there's a lot of effort going into trying to understand exactly what that means. Does it really mean 50%? And so forth. But that could affect us down the road if, in fact, Interlake Tunnel were to be eligible for that program. And then, in the interest of time, two things real quickly. Also related to PL 566, that is part of the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill's path now seems even more uncertain. It was extended from last year to this year. There were many in the in the House Democrats who were optimistic about November results, about the potential to win the House back, and thinking they would extend into next year, be in a better negotiating position. Then there was the Trump-Biden debate, and there's a lot of thought going on about maybe trying to still get something done this fall. So we'll continue to watch that. The county's been engaged on that issue. The county's interest, of course, is the farm labor piece of it. Our interest, of course, is the PL 566 funding piece. So we continue to watch that. And then I will just say, lastly, the United States Supreme Court on June 28th overturned a previous ruling that created a doctrine commonly referred to as Chevron. Chevron basically said that all things being equal, if a judge was considering a dispute, the judge had to give deference to the federal agencies. And so that has been an area of great controversy ever since the ruling was in effect. This undoes that, essentially, from my chair, levels the playing field in terms of resolving these disputes. I also would just simply observe that, we've seen Supreme Court rulings on the Clean Water Act, and then, administrative machinations depending on which, party's in charge in terms of rewriting the rules one way or another. And this very easily could end up in that sort of, back and forth kind of world. So the ultimate effect, yet to be seen. But in terms of the ruling itself, I think a good step in the right direction. And I'll pause there.
All right, I've got a couple questions. First off, PL 566, Schumer doesn't have that on his top 10 with the Senate, so that they're already starting to put it underneath for next year. That's just I talk back to Washington, D.C. every 30 days or so. I sit on a board back there. So it looks like it's just going to roll over one more year. Secondly, the taxes in the state, that the amendment, the proposition that was on the ballot, Newsom didn't like, went to the Supreme Court, California Supreme Court. The justices had been elected, the 7 justices had been elected by previous Democratic governors, and they took his view that it shouldn't be part of the taxation. Whether you like it or not, like I said, we keep on paying more and more taxes in California. The detriment will show 20 or 30 years down the road. The Supreme Court action with the Chevron doctrine. So I did talk to a lawyer about that on water issues. I don't know if it would really affect any of the issues that we deal with, whether it could be challenged. The biggest thing about the Chevron doctrine is these new agencies, the implied power that they have thought they had, they took over, and whether or not they have that implied power is going to be challenged in court. It was assumed that they did have power, that they could implement fines, they could implement penalties. That's the gray area in this reversal that they did in the Supreme Court, at least the lawyer I talked to. So we'll see what happens with that down the road.
Yeah, I see the nexus to us, largely in the realm of any future ESA work that we do. So, if the Habitat Conservation Plan should get challenged, or if it's not completed and we are exposed to future Section 7 rulings and things like that. So that's where it could play out for us. But we don't have anything in play now, and everything that's already been decided doesn't change.
All right, thank you. Any other directors, any comments or questions? Thank you, Ara. All right, committee reports. We'll start with Res Ops.
Let's see, the June meeting was, we talked about the storage and release update. Thank you. And the spillway, the San Antonio spill, and this is all prior to the July 4th fish kill and all this. So we were assuming that the San Antonio spillway replacement project was moving forward. Now we know that has stopped. Ops and maintenance on both reservoirs, we aren't doing anything down in San Antonio. Concessionaire and parks, the unfortunate part is Parks is making $100,000 every weekend on the amount of people staying at the recreation facility. We were knocking them dead. Well, now it's
bad.
San Antonio shut down. And that was about it. The pipeline at San Luis Obispo, they're working on. Hopefully they'll get that up and running within the next 30 to 60 days. And that's it.
All right, thank you. BMAC?
Cancel.
Okay. Oh, it said reschedule notice.
Yeah.
All right. Planning Committee?
Yeah, we've been continuing to meet and prepare for strategic planning, and the Planning Committee is also seeing all sorts of new, I'll say, proposals come through as stated in the bylaws. The Planning Committee should weigh in on those first, and so it's being utilized that way, and a lot of it is in the agenda today and will continue to be so.
Thank you. And then Personnel Administration, Finance, and the Joint Water Resource Leadership Committee were all counseled. We have our attachments that you all received in your packet. We have our reservoir storage release update report. We have our correspondence to Supervisor Church regarding the deep aquifer study. Board of Director comments. Any of you have anything? Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, at last month's meeting, we had the topic about the deep aquifer and about whether it recharges or not, and there was some interesting discussion about the choice of definitions that was used and how that could be perceived by the public. 3 days later, in a Groundwater Sustainability Agency meeting, they took that report, they took those words, and they did exactly what we had discussed it could possibly come out. And there were board members, committee members that immediately asked for a demand management on the deep aquifer because it did not recharge. So
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
in the advisory committee,
Just the last sentence.
they want demand management in the deep aquifer, and which was something that we talked quite a bit about at length, about the choice of words, about recharge and what that means, and how it's perceived in the public. And it was not perceived well, and they took and ran with it. And so again, we have to be very we have to be cognizant of how we use definitions and how it's perceived out in the public, because obviously it wasn't a good thing. So thank you.
Any other board of directors? Comments or questions?
I've just got a comment, Chair. There's 3 assembly bills, 2 assembly bills and 1 Senate bill that are in Sacramento right now. I got this out of the Orange County Register in Irvine. Assembly Bill 2257 is by a Democrat, Laura Wilson. AB 2257 would make it impossible to sue over illegal water rates, no matter how excessive or wrongly calculated. Assembly Bill 1827 by Papan out of San Mateo would allow water agencies to jack up water rates based on fictitious metrics instead of basing their rates on the cost of providing service. The third is a Senate Bill 1072 by Steve Padilla out of Chula Vista. It says water agencies that get caught overcharging their customers don't have to provide refunds. Instead, they would be able to allowed to issue water credits for future bills. These are concerning. Now, I know we're a water agency, but as a taxpayer, a ratepayer out there, these are concerning to those people. And we've got to be careful what bills we pass. And with the current government that we have in Sacramento, they're running everything through pretty quickly. And we're sort of in a fiscal mess up there right now. We'll see what happens, but I just wanted to bring those up because it may or may not affect us.
Thank you. Deidre, you had something?
Yeah, it's kind of a follow-on to Mike's comment regarding the deep aquifer study. I was on vacation during that time, but I did watch the presentation. And I think that we had highly qualified hydrologists that were licensed making the presentation. And then with terms such as recharge, you can easily look online and Google what that definition is. But I think we need to honor the established definitions of terms and not change them. That these reports are very, very complex. I think the recharge, whether recharge inflow, those definitions were well defined, and they're well established definitions that with any report, you have to define your definitions up front, make sure that they're clear, but we also have to be in line with what those geologic terms mean, because if anyone were to Google them, you can look and see what those definitions are and maintain that. Otherwise, no one will really know what we're talking about when we deviate from what established definitions should be. And I think that's important, that we listen to the experts and we use the definitions of experts. And it's our role to question if there's inconsistencies, if the data is conflicting, clarification of the data. But we can't change the definitions of words.
And I absolutely understand what you're saying. I can also Google words in different languages and find out the definitions. I look at, and this happens within every industry, they have their own lexicon, they have their own language. And I had made this point, so I'll make it again. It's all about who you're talking to. And you speak the language of those people you're talking to. This was a public presentation in public. But we all have our opinions. And so that's the great thing about our country. But you make a good point, Deidre. So
No, I understand what you're saying. I will disagree. I'm not going to change the definitions, legal definitions of county council. When you have licensed hydrologists, those are set definitions. And
but that's why we have
learn and understand them.
That's why we have layman terms as well. And lawyers will speak to non-lawyers very specifically, and they will speak to lawyers in a different manner who understand the language specifically. But that is a past meeting, and it's always been my policy that when we finish our business is done, and we look forward to the next business that we get to take care of. But I appreciate the words. I absolutely understand what you're saying, and respect always your point of view. Given that, any other board directors?
Yeah, I'll just end on that note that'll maybe sum all this up is our leadership and staff and board are dealing with incredible issues. And as we, there's always a new high level thing. And as we sit here and you're giving the manager's report and like, oh yeah, funding for the dams, and oh yeah, the HCP, and I'm like, holy crap. So thank you to everyone who, especially on staff, who are leading this, and thank you for the diverse opinions that make our board and our ratepayers and tax dollars go in a good direction. Amen.
Anyone else?
Just something on a little bit different subject, and this kind of tie into apprenticeship. I went through an apprenticeship program myself. I participated in a ceremony this weekend. There's 114 cement masons that graduated from a 3-year apprenticeship program this past weekend. Also, you have carpenters and plumbers and electricians and all that stuff. But the thing is, we continue to turn out craftspeople in the construction trade. And the other flip side is when these people come out of their trades, they have no student debt to look to be forgiven. So
I would encourage them to read about dams construction. Anyone else? All right, hearing and seeing none, we will adjourn this meeting at 2:51 p.m. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
I had